But the main point here is what sort of a precedent does this set for the targeting of certain Christian groups in America? Why now is that acceptable from Republicans who claim to be for religious liberty, claiming that certain Christians could be part of foreign intelligence operations knowingly or unknowingly? This is very alarming. Dyer is a Russian Orthodox Christian. He has a few things to say about this, and he joins us now. Dyer, thank you for joining us again so soon on the broadcast. We appreciate you coming on.
Always glad to be with you.
Well, I am very alarmed by these statements, as a lot of people on social media are, by Representative Joe Wilson. It appears that this may set a very dangerous precedent for attacking Christians in America, or certain aspects of Christianity, certainly in this case, the Russian Orthodox Church. What's your initial assessment of this situation?
It's really not too surprising because this is a continuation of a long-standing Russiagate narrative that has collapsed, but they still try to kind of breathe life into it here and there. It's also tied into, of course, the recent surge in Orthodox conversions that we've been seeing from Protestant and Roman Catholic and even atheist opinions out there in America. People are turning to Orthodoxy. A lot of churches are tripling in size, but it's not just Russian Orthodox churches, that's Serbian churches, it's Antiochian churches, it's all flavors of jurisdictions of Orthodoxy are actually growing. So I think that there's a lot of different things going on here, but overall this is a propaganda geopolitical move on the part of trying to revive this narrative that America's been penetrated by and is suffering from all this Russia subversion, which is nothing could be further from the truth.
Right. Well, Joe Wilson has actually tweeted in response to the backlash that he received, the justified backlash, in my opinion. He says the Russian Orthodox Church is not a separate religious organization, but sorry, this is not the response. Here it is. My comments pertain only to the leadership of the Russian Orthodox Church outside of Russia, operating under the umbrella of the Moscow Patriarchate. Then he takes aim at Patriarch Kirill. He says he's advocated for mass murder and persecution of Christians and served decades as KGB. Most Orthodox churches are not affiliated with Moscow, so he's trying to make that separation now. But what do you say as someone who's part of ROCOR, as a Russian Orthodox Christian, to the allegation that somehow this church is affiliated with foreign intelligence operations? I mean, this is very alarming.
Well, certainly everybody knows about the KGB, infiltrating and using the Russian Orthodox Church during the Cold War. And I've done interviews with experts on this, including experts who are bishops in the Orthodox Church, Metropolitan Jonah, for example. And I did a podcast where we went into the history of how the KGB would actually classify bishops according to the possibility of their compromise or not being compromised. So if you were compromised, you were in this class. If you were maybe compromisable, you were here. And then there was classes of bishops and priests that were not compromisable, that were obviously persecuted. So it's very, I think, disingenuous and, it's not historically accurate to sort of paint everything as, well, they were all KGB. And so therefore it's all still KGB. I mean, there has not been a KGB, for 30 plus years. So to paint it as if a church that was actually founded out of the Cold War and people who were like white Russians fleeing the Bolshevik persecution and the Stalinist persecution, that's where we get the Russian Orthodox Church outside of Russia. It comes out of that historical milieu. And so there was aid even during the Cold War from British intelligence and the CIA to get out of that persecuted state. And now it's kind of like there's an article at Orthodox England. I think it's a very good history of this stuff. It's called Between Two Thieves, where the Orthodox Church kind of is in this position of being fought over between during the Cold War, obviously Russia and the West, but now it's still kind of revived with this idea that both sides want to use the church for soft power or to portray it as, some sort of a tool of subversion. But both sides of the dialectic tend to try to use the church as a form of soft power. And that's why it's really disingenuous to paint it like everybody's on one side of some political issue. I mean, I've been in the Russian Orthodox Church since, I don't know, 2018, 17, somewhere in there. And, Putin doesn't come up. We don't usually talk about that. Usually we're talking about apologetics and theology and the gospel. very little geopolitics, although I do comment on geopolitics because I have my own personal opinion. So I don't represent ROCOR, although I am a believer and attend a Russian Orthodox Church. But any Orthodox Christian can attend any canonical Orthodox Church. So it's not like a denomination. It's really just jurisdictions. And we're not technically like underneath. We don't answer to Moscow per se. We're underneath our local bishops. So bishops are decentralized in the Orthodox Church. So I think a lot of people think of maybe the Orthodox Church like there's these popes or these 5 popes of the patriarchs or something like that. They have canonical privileges and jurisdictional privileges, but they're not popes. So it really, I think, it's based on a lot of misunderstanding and mischaracterizations to think like, everybody just sort of does what Putin says or something like that. I mean, it's entirely possible to disagree not only with the Moscow Patriarchate, but also with even your bishop. You can disagree without everybody sort of being lumped in as subversives or something like that.
Right, absolutely. And you've given the sort of historical understanding of this. We have a modern day example of a very real takeover of the Ukrainian church. There is a prolific lawyer that has been on with Tucker Carlson multiple times. He's a Jewish lawyer who's defending the Ukrainian Orthodox Church over there, talking about the persecution of Ukrainian Orthodox Christians under Zelensky. So let's not go back to Cold War examples. Let's look at modern day examples of what's actually happening in Ukraine. And I guess that this request for Pam Bondi to investigate this or consider whether people are influenced in America by a foreign intelligence operation is ignoring what's happening in Ukraine.
Well, the irony is, of course, that the State Department and the CIA set up the schismatic Ukrainian church with a guy who was defrocked, named Dumenko. And even the ecumenical patriarch at Bartholomew, even he formerly rejected this guy. And so pressure was put on geopolitically to accept this situation so that there could be a split in Ukraine to split the people, religiously speaking. And this is really an old strategy, an imperial strategy of divide and conquer, to push the tensions and the hot buttons in any region or any area in order to divide and conquer. So in the US, for example, they would use racial tensions because that's the classic sort of divide that Americans have had going back to the Civil War. And if you wanted to do the situation in the Ukraine, you would press the religious divisions there. So to try to split the Ukrainian church. And then, of course, the irony is that Zelensky and others have persecuted the Orthodox Christians throughout the Ukraine, and just they cast them all as agents of Putin and all agents of the KGB and all this nonsense. The church has been persecuted, and that's part of what we expect, as Christians, is to be persecuted. So it's not surprising. The state always wants to use the church as an arm of the state, and that can certainly happen anywhere. I mean, you can have a relationship even in Russia, like we said during the Cold War, where there was an attempt to use the church as an arm of the state, especially under Stalin. So it's not something that never happens, but this is all really part of propaganda and castigating everything as either black or white, when it's a little more difficult and nuanced than that. But most of the time, the Orthodox Church, especially even in America, isn't really that political. Most of the focus, as we said, is on theology.
Final question for you, because this is where my mind immediately went when we set a precedent of lawmakers talking about certain Christians being part of foreign intelligence operations based on their favorability towards a foreign war, perhaps. That sets a very dangerous precedent in America for religious liberty. Certainly places a target on Orthodox Christians. What do you make of that? And what should, obviously, clarifying this issue is part of reversing that trend, but do you think that that's something that will continue?
Well, notice it's very selective. They've tried this in the past. I think, during the Russiagate, Russia collusion nonsense, which was all, basically a Democratic Party farmed out to British intelligence hoax that they made up. They tried to craft a narrative, and they would even at times try to float ideas, I think in like Foreign Policy magazine and different places, that, oh, what about these Orthodox Christians? They're all part of this plot that Putin's involved in. And they did the same thing, if you remember, with the traditional Catholics. The FBI suddenly said, oh, all the traditional Catholics are also now suspect.
Right.
And they got tremendous backlash from that. And they're getting tremendous backlash from this because they're out of touch. People have awoken to this nonsense. I noticed, for example, the Pope Leo was pushing climate change and pushing open borders, and just thousands and thousands of comments, 98% of the comments calling him out as a hypocrite for having giant walls around the Vatican, the Leonine Wall, for having the most restrictive, entrance into Vatican, because it's a city state, right, into the Vatican city state, beyond any other nation state out there or any other city state. So people are noticing the massive hypocrisy when it comes to this. In the case of calling out, the Russian Orthodox Church as some sort of subversive foreign influence. Well, I mean, are we going to call out AIPAC as a subversive foreign influence based on religious ideas as well?
Right. But I mean, the precedent is
Selective.
Selective. Right. Yes, that's correct. Thank you so much for your comments, Jay. Thank you for joining us today. We appreciate you clarifying this.